Well, good afternoon. My name's Eddie Rester. I'm one of the pastors here at Oxford University United Methodist Church. We welcome you watching from wherever you are to this community conversation. We had a community conversation back when all of this started, back in March, with Bill Henning, the CEO of the hospital, and Robin Tannehill, the mayor of our city, just to talk about things that were coming. And as school approached this year, we realized we needed another community conversation to talk about our schools. What's going on with them? What do we need to know? And how can we best support our schools? So I'm thankful that you're with us for this conversation. Our conversation partners today are from the Lafayette County School District. We have Adam Pugh with us today. We have Brian Harvey from the Oxford School District. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Well, we'll get started in just a sec with some of the, what we want to do is start with some of the broad questions. We're going to dig down into some pretty specific questions I think that people are asking. Then we want to step back out to community support. But before we get there, just tell us a little bit about yourselves. How long have you been where you are? Adam, how long have you been at Lafayette County Schools?
I came as principal in 2002 and served as principal 7 or 8 years. I went to Pontotoc 2 years as superintendent, and I came back here in 2011 as superintendent at Lafayette.
So almost 10 years as superintendent.
Yep.
That's a lot of stable leadership there. So Brian, what about you?
I'm a graduate of Oxford High School, and this was my first job in 1995. Started as a teacher and coach, and then moved into administration and then into the central office. This is my 9th year as superintendent of the Oxford School District.
We are very fortunate to have both of you in leadership here in our community because, again, y'all have been in the long term in your places. Let's hear a little bit about the schools. We have two very excellent school districts. We are fortunate in our area. But give us a picture of the scope. Oxford is a 6A school, so how many students and teachers are we talking about?
We've got about 330 teachers and about 575 total employees, and that's all classified staff, bus drivers, teacher assistants. And then we've got right now 4,652 students who are registered. We will have some of those that drop before the beginning of the year, but that's how many have registered and said they're coming.
Okay. So that's about 5,000 people. Okay. Adam?
We've got about 2,900 students, probably 450 total employees. Again, this year we are opening a brand new school with our elementary, so this is the first time ever in the history of Lafayette that we're going to have one of our schools off campus. So that's going to help us tremendously.
I would imagine that's going to help the traffic just
Yes.
just a little bit.
Yes.
So really, when you begin to think about the impact of the two school districts, you're talking about 8,000, 9,000 people between teachers, staff, students. That's a remarkable number of folks from our county that are involved with the schools. So let's kind of step back just a second. We all go on spring break in March, and we don't ever come back. It's the spring break that I feel like somehow we're still on spring break. But y'all have been working for really 5 months now on what school will look like this fall. We thought things would change over the summer with numbers. Things haven't changed in terms of a reduced number of COVID infections. So tell us just a little bit, in your mind, what are some of the big challenges that y'all have been trying to figure out over the months? And I know there's some big ones, but what are some of the ones maybe that people don't think about that you've had to struggle with?
Obviously since March, trying to figure out the best way to keep our staff and our students safe. That safety is always our number one priority, but obviously now, it's an even bigger challenge for us. And so just the amount of money that we have spent on hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, just the electrostatic sprayers that we've bought. For example, we have bought 8 50-gallon drums of hand sanitizer. We have bought, I don't know how many gallons, that's the liquid, then the gel hand sanitizer, and then again the products that we have bought to try to sanitize the buildings and our buses each day when people are gone. It's a tremendous amount of money that we've spent, but those are things that we're doing, again, just to keep our staff and our students as safe as we possibly can. Again, we have almost all of our water fountains. We have turned the bubblers off, and we have the bottle filling station so that they won't drink out of the water fountains. We're fortunate that we had somebody donate water bottles for all of our students, and so those are just some of the things that we're doing. That again, we buy cleaning supplies each year, but not
to this degree.
No.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges have been, and this isn't anyone's fault, but the changes in guidance that we've received due to the nature of what we know about the virus and how it spreads. And we think we get some part of it figured out, and then something changes and the guidance change, and then we have to go relook. And I think that was part of our solution in forming a committee to look at this, is specifically looking at phase 2 of the CDC's guidelines. What are those things that are going to give us the most problems? And so we went through a process to evaluate what are the things that are easy to do, what are the things that are hard, what are the things that are going to have a high impact, what are the things that are going to have a low impact. And so we obviously want to do the easy things that have high impact of kids being in school. And so we've tried to do that. But there are challenges abound as far as transportation and school buses. I'm not sure if Lafayette struggles, but we struggle with school bus drivers. And when you talk about getting the number of students to school, and that's their only way to school, we obviously can't social distance on a school bus.
Right.
So how do we mitigate that in order that kids come to school? And then I think the other thing that we weren't expecting was the differences in race that chose the face-to-face option and the virtual option. About 88% of our white parents chose face-to-face, and about 40% of our African-American parents chose face-to-face. And that's not something we were expecting.
So, as you said, everything continues to change a little bit. So I would imagine you've put some energy into planning some things that you've just kind of had to scrap all together, come back and start over. My wife's an administrator. She works in the Oxford School District, and y'all have put in a lot of hours just addressing the challenges. I know that. So let's talk about some of the changes. You talked about water fountains, but what are some of the big changes as students come back that the kids will see and that parents will see very quickly? Adam, you want to start that one?
Sure. I think one of the main things is a face-to-face option or a virtual option. That is something that's new. We did, let me say this, we tried at that in the spring, but we're going to go live with some of our kids this week that are starting school with a virtual option. We divided our kids into teams to come back to try to talk about the one-way hallways and the things that we're going to do, and again, just to get them used, I hate to say trained, but get them, to doing the things that we want them to do. And so we're going to do even talking about a hybrid option or a hybrid start to school is all change. And again, it's going to look a lot different. Just like I said, from the water fountains to eating lunch in their rooms, grabbing breakfast and going to their room, and going back to even just the number of garbage cans that we're going to need with kids. Right. So that every time that we begin to talk about something, then that brought up something else that, okay, if we're going to do this, then we need to do this. And those are just things that, again, in a normal year, we didn't think about all those things. So every time, as Brian said, every time that something comes up, it triggers something else. Okay, let's think about this. And again, a lot of times those changes, there's money involved in those changes.
Yeah. Brian, what about for you? What are some of the big changes people people will see as they come back to school?
I think they will see school environments particularly that are very structured and regimented. There will be times it will be important that everybody sticks to those time schedules. And we've all had schedules for the safe operation of schools, but it's different now. And the challenge is going to be, getting voluntary compliance so that we can stay in school.
Right.
Because if we don't, then obviously we're going to have infections and we'll have quarantines, which will trigger outbreaks, and then we'll have to close schools. And so getting people to comply with a very structured, how the classroom looks, how we go to the restroom, how we, recess is going to look different. Everything about school will be very different than it was last year at this time.
I think about growing up and the idea of trying to social distance at school, it doesn't, you don't think about how impossible that is. Kids are social by nature. That's part of the reason they come to school. So you think about recess being different, lunch in the rooms instead of the lunchroom, no common areas being open. It's going to be a very different experience for students and for teachers as well. And you talk about voluntary compliance. Are y'all doing things to help students know this is what's expected of you this year? You talked a little bit about bringing teams in. Are y'all doing anything else to help students know what's expected?
I think just reviewing those rules and framing it in a way that we need your help. This is not to punish you. We're not doing this to be punitive in any nature, but we need your help. Your parents have chosen for you to be here, and we want you to be here. But if we're going to keep everybody safe, students and staff, these are the things that are going to be necessary. And so hand hygiene, making sure that we honor the times and schedules and no visitors to school buildings and all of those things. And I want to emphasize, all of these things are temporary. They're not long-term. We're not looking at doing this long-term, but they're temporary if we want to have school under the conditions that we currently have.
That's correct. I mean, just as Brian was talking, I was just thinking about some things. For instance, when the bell rings at our secondary, changing classes, all of our kids will not change classes at one time. There'll be a couple of different bells. Part of them will go at one time. Then when they move around, then we'll ring a bell for the rest of them to go. And again, as Brian said, I guess regimented is going to be what we're looking at. And I like for our kids to have freedom, but during this, they're not going to have as much freedom to move about and to, as you said, to socialize. I mean, because that's if we want to stay in school, they're going to have to follow our guidelines and do what we ask them to do to implement social distancing as much as possible.
Well, let's dive into some specifics now. There are things I think that parents want to know, maybe they've heard about. We talked to different parents and folks around about some questions, some specifics. I asked both of you about some specifics, that maybe questions that you were getting repeats on. And so let's dive into those right quick. One of them is about quarantines. So someone gets diagnosed with COVID, student or teacher. How do you make a decision about who else gets quarantined? How far does that go? What's your process?
Yeah, and this is one of those areas that the guidance from the Department of Health has changed, and it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just a misunderstanding of the circumstances. Originally, we were told that you were considered to be in close contact if you were within 6 feet of a person for more than 15 minutes. But if you had a face covering on, then that did not apply to you. Dr. Dobbs then came back and clarified a couple of weeks later that only counts as if you have a surgical mask in a medical environment. And so for that 2 to 3 week period, we'd been operating under those, well, we think we can have school and do it. And that was a game changer, and that potentially changes. So there's a couple of different things. There's an isolation when someone has actually been tested or has tested positive.
Right.
There's a quarantine, which they've been in close contact with someone who has tested positive. Isolation orders come from the Department of Health. Quarantine orders come from the Department of Health, but they will communicate with us in schools. And then there's the child who is just sick with a non-COVID-like illness, and so we'll have to find ways, and we have those ways to deal with that, so that, you know, we can try to ensure to make kids safe.
Adam, what are your thoughts on?
Well, here again, I echo a lot of what Brian said. You know, the one of the things that we're going to, again, we assign seats, where a lot of our classes in the secondary don't have assigned seats, but they're all going to be required to have assigned seats now, so that when we do have, and we're going to have, I mean, we're living under a rock if we believe that we're not going to have
Right.
students that are going to test positive. But when they do, we're going to go back to that contact tracing, and then try to notify those you know, hey, we're not going to give the individual's name out, obviously, but they've been in contact. And so, you know, there's no right or wrong answer to what you're doing here. We're going to give this the best shot that we can, and again, go back to what I said, try to keep our kids as safe as we possibly can, and our staff.
And I think both Adam and I and both school boards believe that kids are better in school than being out of school, which they've been the last, 12 to 14 weeks, even with the measures and things that we have in place. Quarantines and isolation is the Department of Health has been pretty steady on 14 days. In a school setting, there are different numbers of days depending on the business, but for a school setting, they've been pretty
14
steady
days.
on 14 days.
So what's the threshold for notifying the public? You know, Corinth started a week or so ago. They work on a very different school schedule than the rest of the schools in the state. They're kind of a year-round school model, I think, is what they call that. They had their first positive. It made national news, probably because they were the first school to get cranking. So, you know, they had to obviously, that got shared. So what's the threshold before you feel like you have to start notifying all parents or notifying the community, or kind of what's your thinking on that?
You know, I think Dr. Dobbs, I think Brian was on that same Zoom call with Dr. Dobbs. He had mentioned 3 in a group, or if I remember correctly, he's kind of backed off of that number. But I don't know if there's a certain number that Brian, do you know if that's still?
Yeah, and just Friday, I was on another Zoom meeting with him, and they've pretty much settled on three cases in an individual classroom or grouping within 14 days, and then if you have 3 of those in a particular school within 14 days, then they recommend closing the schools.
Okay.
You know, there may be instances where I'm going to pick on the 3rd grade right now. You know, Miss Jones's her section of 3rd grade, if you have 3 or 4 kids in there, you may have to ask that particular class to hey, we need you guys to stay home for 14 days. And so I can see that happening a lot. You know, Dr. Dobbs even mentioned, you know, for teams or clubs that have met, you know, you may have to quarantine those. So the last thing that we want to do is send 2,900 kids home and say we're going to close school down for 14 days. That's the last thing that we want to do. So the main thing that I know us, and I'm sure Brian said, we're asking for cooperation from our parents that, hey, if your child is sick, please keep them home.
Stay home.
You know, stay home. And again, as much as possible, please practice the social distancing when you're not at school. Because we're going to do everything that we can while we're at school. Or we're going to maintain that 6-foot radius at all times. That's not going to happen at school. But we're gonna try our best. I know Friday, my wife teaches biology and anatomy and physiology at our high school, and she's fortunate in the setup of her room because it's got a lab attached to it. We spread her desk out, and she can maintain that 6 foot, that 6 feet area, and so they can social distance in her classroom, and that won't be possible with all of them. But we're going to do our very best, again, to try to practice that. And again, when our kids there are that's the reason why we're taking that 2.5 weeks of hybrid to try to get them, hey, it's very regimented, very structured, but this is what we've got to do in order to keep school open.
I was listening to a podcast about school openings in other countries, and they talked about Finland or Sweden or somewhere. When they restarted, they had pods of 12 to do exactly what you said, so that when something happened in one of the pods, they just sent one group home instead of having to send everybody home. And it sounds like with the regimentation that y'all are talking about, the grouping, that y'all be able to maintain pretty tight control over where it is and controlling as best you can.
And that changes. It's obviously different at the high school setting where you have assigned seats, and if you have someone who tests positive and those kids who are within that 4, 5, 6 foot range, that grouping may be the only ones that have to go on. Although in an elementary school, depending on the situation, that may be, unattainable. You can't. We simply can't ask teachers to keep a checklist of every minute that every child is with every other child. So it may be that we have to send that whole class home in order to avoid an outbreak. And I think that's the thing that schools have to really focus on. We don't want to be the place where the virus is transmitted.
Right.
And because we are going to have students who test positive and teachers who test positive, we just don't want that transmission to be in school.
Right.
Brian also mentioned the secondary. These masks, as we're all wearing here, it's going to be much easier for a second. Now, I didn't say it would be easy, but I said much easier for our secondary kids to keep their mask on and do. But for our little ones, it's going to be a very difficult thing, and so we know that. Again, what we want our parents to do is just try to to start now. Hey, you need to keep this on. Here's the proper way. Cover your nose, so again, those are things that we're going to try to do in those 2.5 weeks.
When my daughters were young, I'm thinking first and second grade, they'd come home with the wrong lunchbox, the wrong coat, or without things. So I would imagine a mask on its own will be we'll pray for those teachers. We'll pray for those teachers. Let's talk a little bit about virtual learning, and then I want to skip back to recess in just a second. So virtual learning, everybody got sent home last spring, virtual learning. How have the expectations changed this fall? What's going to be different about virtual learning this fall as opposed to being thrown into the deep end with it last spring? How are y'all approaching it differently?
Well, I'll say for one thing, there's going to be accountability from both on the student's part and the teacher's part. Our system that we implemented last fall or last spring, we allowed the teachers to basically post a video, but didn't require live instruction. We also didn't require the students to follow their schedule because we don't believe that a student in front of a screen for 8 hours a day is necessarily positive for them. So there will be accountability. We will have a testing center in which students will take proctored tests. The younger grades will report, students will report to Bramlett, and then everybody else will have to sign up for a time at our new central office where they'll come and proctor a test in a socially distanced with masks environment so that we can keep them safe. The big thing, we've set up a system that we hope to be synchronous synchronous by 9 weeks, that by the end of the 9 weeks, virtual students are at the same place as face-to-face students, but asynchronous in that they don't have to do all of the assignments that the face-to-face students do on Monday and Tuesday. They do have to have them done by the end of the week or by the end of the unit, but not at the same rate and pace. And so I think from a parental standpoint, and that's one of our biggest concerns, is that our virtual students are doing what they need to do in order to be ready to return whenever that time comes. Hopefully, second 9 weeks, we have given parents an option to choose, and we've got 68% of our parents who chose the face-to-face option and about 32% of our parents who chose the virtual option. We hope that we're in a position in October to bring everybody back to face-to-face.
As of Friday, we had 18% of our parents that had chosen the virtual option. we're going to utilize, again, we've got even though our schools are less than 2 miles apart, I think probably from the furthest to about 2 miles, but the problem with many of our students is the connectivity. And so we're going to, when school gets started back, we're going to put a device in every student's hand. We had pretty much a one-to-one when they were at school, but we're going to put devices in their hands now to carry home. We know that connectivity is still a problem, so what we hope to do is before they leave, have work that they can load on their device, and then if we're out for a period of time, we're trying to get some connection points out in our community so that they could go to either a fire station or a voting precinct or those things to get connectivity, and that's what we're going to work with our supervisors on us purchasing those devices and getting them installed. And so we still know that connectivity is an issue for our students, but we're gonna do a much better job with the virtual education than we did in the spring. And I'm not going to sit here and say we did an outstanding job in the spring, because we did not, and I know that. But we did the best we could in that short period of time that we had, and so we're going to utilize in the secondary again at Lafayette a program called Edgenuity to help with our virtual students, and so that's what's going to work best for us. And again, it's not going to be perfect for us because, again, with the connectivity issues, and so that's the reason why we've gone the route that we have.
So this is going to be a commercial. Real briefly, while you bring up connectivity issue, Mississippi continues to rate as either the bottom or next to the bottom in broadband connectivity in the United States. It's always us or West Virginia at the bottom. Call, email your legislator today and tell them to fix this. They have the power and the ability to fix this, and they need to fix it because our students are going to pay the price this fall because they failed to do that. So I'm back from my commercial. What's the orientation for virtual school look like? If a student chooses that, parents have chosen that for their student, how do they get kind of on-ramped into that?
Well, we've got parent training tomorrow and Tuesday, and device pickup, or maybe Tuesday and Wednesday, and we've got device pickup tomorrow and Tuesday. And they will be, if they responded by the appropriate time, then they will be able to pick up a device tomorrow and Tuesday, and they'll be ready to start the first day. Again, there will be more accountability. We will have face-to-face check-ins. We will have multiple people checking in on students. And honestly, they're going to get a lot more attention than they got in the spring, and some of them will like that, and some of them won't
like that, yeah. All right, what about for y'all?
We've got device pickups, and again, I do not. I should have memorized the days that we've got that, but that's coming up, I think, this week also. And I can't, for the life of me, I can't remember the days that we've got device pickup for our virtual students. And again, as we do that, we're going to, hey, this is what's expected of you. And again, like Brian said, it's going to be much more involved than what we did in the spring, and again, accountability. They're going to be accountable for those lessons. They're going to have to check in with the teachers. The teachers are going to be checking in with them. Where are you? What can I do to help you? And we have, with our teachers, we have assigned. Many of our teachers now have a virtual period where they will be assigned these students, whether it be science, math, or whatever. But our virtual students, they're assigned to assist them in the help that they need.
Let me just add to that. I think that's one of the areas, and what Adam has described is absolutely workable for their situation. We've got 32%. We felt we had the need. All right, we're going to have virtual teachers, and we're going to have face-to-face teachers, and we're not going to have crossover unless you're at one of the Carnegie Unit courses at the high school. But again, our virtual teachers will be delivering virtual instruction to all of those students who are virtual and our face-to-face. So we won't have crossover at this time unless, face-to-face students are quarantined or isolated,
right.
And then they will stay in that same class.
That's just like Brian said earlier. I mean, from county to county, but even district to district. He's got, I can't remember what percent he said, but we've got 18%. So with the number that we got, it doesn't make sense to put a teacher
Right.
virtually all day long. We can do what we need to do by period.
So when a parent at Lafayette looks at something Oxford's doing and says, well, they're doing that, or Oxford looks at something Lafayette's doing and says, well, they're doing that, two different situations.
Two different situations because of the needs of what we have. And again, the connectivity with most of his students is not going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue
Right.
with a large portion of ours. So that's why there's differences in what we do. There's variables in what we're doing, and so again, what works for them doesn't necessarily work for us.
Well, I feel like the virtual learning, as school districts get deeper into that, it's going to open some doors maybe for students who in the past, I had a daughter who was out for, almost 3 months from school when she was a sophomore. I think it's going to, down the road when we're not in a pandemic, you will have learned some things that can assist in education. Let's drop back to recess for just a minute. Y'all mentioned recess would be different this fall. So what does recess look like for a fourth grader in a socially distanced world?
Well, one thing,
Yeah.
it means that the common play implements that, and instruments that kids normally play on probably are off limits. Playing tag, playing lots of, games where kids are touching and are probably not a great thing. Now, current guidance says that, things aren't transmitted on surfaces as
Right.
much as we once thought, but I think that's one of the things that we certainly want to try to avoid, and having somebody go out and clean between recesses is not really feasible. So I think assigning groups to different places on the playground and allowing them to move and walk and run and come up with games and things. And, being an elementary teacher was challenging enough, and it is going to be terribly challenging moving forward. I see a lot of Coach Calhoun being used, and the educators in the room know who Coach Calhoun, but this is video-based instruction, that's movement-based instruction, so, it's a challenge.
Adam, anything to add to that?
No, it's the same thing. All fourth grade may not go at the same time, to recess. You may have one group going at this time, and again, you're assigned to this area, you're assigned to that area. So it's going to look differently. And again, that's going to vary from school to school and district to district. It's the same, because what we do with our pre-K through 2 students may not be, as far as recess, may not be the same for our third and fourth. And so, again, we're going to have to work what fits for that particular school.
And this is temporary. I can't
Yes.
remember which one of you said that earlier. All this that we're talking about, we hope, is temporary. And so your kid comes home and playground time wasn't what it was. It's temporary.
It's temporary.
This is temporary.
But something Brian, or I think you said though, I think though what this pandemic has done, it's going to change the way that we look at school. I think we'll get back to somewhat the way we used to do things, but the virtual option and things, I think that this is opening up a brand new arena, if you will, for the way that we look at school in the future. Like you said with your daughter, and just, hey, I think this best, a virtual route best fit. I think we're going to have to look at that in the future.
Right.
when this pandemic is over, and just look at things differently, like we never have.
And I think that's really important, because for all of us, and again, Adam said his percentage of virtual students was 18%, ours is 32%. If we don't embrace this and learn from this, the potential is that 18% of his students won't show up next year, or 32% of my students won't show up next year, which means in already a challenging and difficult budget situation, we have additional issues because our ADA, if we don't provide for that this year, we don't receive funding for that number of students next year, which hurts everything.
So let's talk about the switching back and forth between virtual and in-person and virtual. What are the guidelines for that? Can somebody just 3 weeks in say, hey, I've decided we want to come back, or I want to take my kid virtual? How are y'all approaching that?
What we're going to do is they can switch one time between now and August the 28th. After the 28th, they're going to have to stay
They're locked in.
for the 9 weeks. And so we're going to give them that one opportunity. It just won't work if they're switching back and
Yeah.
forth. So we're going to give them that one opportunity.
And for us, for as long as we're, dealing with this emergency, we will send out a pulse check on our virtual learning environment and our face-to-face learning environment in early September. And then mid to late September, we will give the opportunity to parents again to self-select for the second 9 weeks. Due to the nature of how we're scheduling, in that there are virtual classes and face-to-face classes, and they're not the same teachers.
Right.
They're different teachers. We can't allow any changes. As a matter of fact, our virtual slots filled up yesterday. And, that's just where we are. That doesn't mean that something may not come open, but at this point, that's where we are. Parents will have an option in mid to late September to choose for second 9 weeks.
Now, like Brian said, also, the second 9 weeks, we'll take a look at this again, but that August the 28th is only for the
first 9 weeks. So
That's
y'all
right.
are basically going 9 weeks at a time.
That's right. That's
Okay.
what we're doing.
And the reality is, depending on when the vaccine comes out, this could be first 9 weeks, second 9 weeks, third 9 weeks, into the spring, which I have a high school senior, and we don't need this to go into the spring.
No, we do not.
She does not want that. So we've talked about virtual. Let's talk a little bit about face-to-face. What does a face-to-face classroom look like? You've shared a little bit about that, but what does it look like for a face-to-face learner?
A bunch of people sitting around with masks on.
So masks.
Yeah. So,
Can they do face shields, or do they have to do
well,
masks?
we bought a bunch of face shields also, but with that, let's just say that there's a necessity that they do a lab. Then what we're going to ask them to do is have that face shield on plus their mask. And again, they'll be, when possible, we're going to let them have because I need a break from this thing right now. And
Yeah, I know, yeah.
I know that students do, so we're going to try our best to give them, mask breaks. But when they're moving around, transitioning, we're going to require them to keep them on. But, again, regimented one-way hallways, the face-to-face is going to be regimented, but we're going to try to do it, the teaching and the instructing very similar to what we've done before. The teachers may not be up and down the aisles as much as before, but again, it's mask on and sanitizing. We're going to push. You got to wash your hands. You got to sanitize your hands, and so that's what we're going to just push and just drive home each day.
And I think, students staying in the same classroom rather than transitioning, students staying in the same classroom and teachers transitioning. Anything that we can do to mitigate risk, 6 desks 6 feet apart. For us, with the number of students who have chosen the virtual option, it will be more possible for us to social distance in classrooms. We're going to encourage teachers to take mask breaks, go outside, let kids, where they can social distance and take their mask off. As far as face shields, we've asked, and this is from an instructional standpoint, this is pretty important. We've asked teachers to wear a face shield if they're delivering whole group instruction. We think that's appropriate as long as they don't break, as long as they can social distance. Dr. Dobbs has said it's not as effective as a mask, but if they're able to social distance, then there's really, if we're 6 feet apart, we could take our masks off now. But we're going to ask them to wear the face shield if they're delivering whole group instruction, and then if they work with an individual or group, that they put the mask on in combination with the face shield.
Anything else you want to add to that, Adam?
No, I mean, again, we're going to, like Brian said, if they can, we're going to ask them to wear their shields. And this is going to happen. The kids are going to need help, individual help, and so that's, they need to have their mask on. The child needs to have their mask on. So, again, it's just going to be, it's going to change period to period. If we can social distance, then they can take their mask off, and if they can't, then they'll need to have it on.
I want to thank y'all for how much thought, obviously, y'all, your staffs, teachers have put into stuff. And I know we could probably sit up here and talk all afternoon picking apart different questions and aspects. But I want to step back now from some of the specifics that y'all have given us. And let's talk about what you need from the community this year, particularly as you get cranking up in the next week or so. What can we do to come alongside our schools this fall?
From the community, parents, help us. If your child is sick, please stay home. That is going to be the main thing that we ask parents. If they have a fever, and I know little kids are going to have fever, but please keep them home. And that's the main thing. I think what will help us is if your child is sick, please keep them home.
And I would maybe say, even go ahead and start thinking, there's going to come a day when my child is sick. What's my plan? Usually when my kids got sick, it was, well, who's doing what and how and when. But maybe go ahead and think about the plan right now for when your child, what are the 2 or 3 options?
Yeah, and again, just because a child has fever does not mean that they have,
right.
COVID, and we know that. Again, but like you said, just be thinking ahead that when your child's sick, please keep them home.
Yeah. And I think, we can't control the things that happen to us, but we can control how we respond to them. And this is one of those situations. I think being as positive as we can with teachers and administrators and their children, and that's on us to be as positive as we can with parents and explain rationale and that things are temporary, but this is necessary in order to have kids at school. I think pay special attention to our first-year teachers. As the father of a young man who's going to start his first year teaching next week, there's nobody they can ask on how to do
right.
this.
There's no mentor for this.
There's no mentor for this. And so just being patient with everybody and I think forgiving and understanding that this is temporary and we will get through it. But we have to put our empathy hats on and right. View things from a different person's perspective.
Somebody last week shared with me that one of the issues in America right now is that compassion is in short supply. And as I think about, things being different and changes happening, maybe changes that every parent or every kid doesn't understand, I think a dose of compassion with our administrators and our teachers would go a long way right now. And I think even compassion, I'm going to say this out loud, compassion online with Facebook and Twitter and whatever other thing is out there. But just if you don't know, don't spread. Make a phone call and find out for yourself. Anything else that you really need from us?
I think that's a really important point because rumors will get spread about a child who has it, and that child and their families and their medical issues do not need to be all over Facebook. And we just need to be very careful about that. I know one of your previous questions was about notifications, and I don't know that I answered that. We're going to try to notify people when we find out. We're going to try to notify them by 5 o'clock of the day that we find out. And, of course, we may not find out until a day or two later.
Right.
And so just being patient with that, creating hysteria is not going to help the situation. Right. And so if it doesn't help, I think we should all ask, maybe we shouldn't post it.
Right. So if somebody hears somebody say that somebody else said that somebody's cousin's aunt's brother heard that there were 3,000 kids at Lafayette with COVID, they should probably check that out before they post that?
They should check that out. A good friend of mine that's a superintendent in another district. I was talking with him this weekend, and they have they've had a child that has tested positive, and he said just the abuse that family has taken on Facebook. And that's not what we need from our parents. Like you said, the compassion thing. Kids are going to get sick,
right?
And they didn't go out and, hey, I want to, it's going to happen. And just that compassion that one family needs to give another one, because who knows, it could be their child, and they would want that compassion just like anybody else. So let's keep people's medical off of social media. Let's keep it out of other people's business, because their medical condition is between them and their family, and we don't need that on social media.
And I would also add, extend a little trust. Y'all have done 5 months worth of work on this. You developed plans, again, that you've had to scrap, that you've rebuilt. You've taken, the science has continued to grow on what we know. I mean, I remember when we were thinking about how much we were going to have to scrub down every doorknob, everything that people touched. And now the science says that's not as important. So y'all are dealing with kind of this changing thing. So just trust that y'all are staying on top of it. You're getting a lot more information than my wife, who's an administrator, is getting. You're getting a lot more information than just the random person on the street is getting about how to best do school during this time.
Well, and I don't think he would mind me telling this part of the conversation, but you mentioned Corinth in as we were talking, and I had heard about their positive test. Not only had I heard about their positive test, but I heard that there were multiple positive tests, and there was a rush on the central office and schools for everybody wanting to swap to virtual. So I texted Dr. Childress and just asked him, hey, have you got a second? Just trying to prepare. And he graciously said, sure, give me a call. Spoke with him, and I asked him those questions. He said, I just got notified myself. So anything else? And that's just how quickly things can get spread that are untrue. And that came from people who I trust, that trusted other people, but the story grew. Right. And, so just we have to be careful about that kind of thing.
I've got one more question. I'm going to go back to something specific because one of my staff members texted me. They've been watching the comments. And one of the things that we didn't address that people want to know, absentees. Let's say a kid is in a classroom where somebody tests positive and gets sent home for 14 days. How do the absences work this year? I mean, everybody's laughing up here.
Yeah,
good luck.
I'm gonna let you start with that.
Well, and that is truly a puzzle because absentees do impact our funding.
Right.
I mean, it absolutely does. Now, let me say that neither one of us want kids to be at school while they're sick. And we especially don't want them to be at school if they're sick with COVID or they've been in close contact with someone who has COVID. So we want them to be at home. However, we still have to account for their absences. And we are trying to investigate, because of the math problem that is set up that goes into the funding formula, we are trying to investigate different ways to do that. That's on our agenda to address through policy this week. And there is no great solution, because we're trying to figure out what's the data that we can get out. And potentially, of course, for face-to-face students, it's, are you here at school?
Right.
Now, we all know that sometimes kids are at school, but they're not really there.
They've checked out.
That's right. So we've got to find a way to deal with the virtual students. And we think if we can find a way to translate doing assignments, that is their attendance. But mechanically trying to make that work is certainly a challenge.
So maybe if a kid has to suddenly transfer because of quarantine to virtual learning, it's not really an absence as much as you've just shifted a form of learning.
Right. And I think it really comes back to us. We adopted a portrait of a graduate, and personal responsibility was one of those things. If you have assignments to do and you do all of the assignments, is it really necessary that you're in class every day, all day?
Right.
So those are the things that we're trying to evaluate and see, can we put a number on of a child's attendance virtually?
Adam, what do you want to add to that?
Well, like Brian said, this absentee thing it's a huge puzzle with a lot of different pieces, and trying to come up with a clear answer to that is not just, oh, hey, you're virtual, we're gonna, there's just not a clear answer right now. But we're gonna do everything that we can to count those students present that are working. But I don't know if anybody can give you a clear answer right now on those students.
So maybe part of the grace given to y'all and to your administrators is when they say, I don't know, trust that they don't know, but they're
I
going to try to
truly-
figure it out.
I truly don't know. And again, I know we're waiting from guidance from MDE on exactly how that we can do that. And that just has not come to us yet. And I don't mean to be dumping on our Mississippi Department of Education. I'm not. It's just we don't have 100% clear guidance on that right now.
Right. If people need to get information, what's the clearest path that y'all use to communicate, whether it's about school closures or about changes in policy or the absentee policy when it gets decided? Where can people go to consistently to get information?
Well, for us, it's going to be our website. And then, of course, if they're a parent in the district, then we will have their contact information and we will do direct communication with them through text and email, social media for the community at large. Just trying to, because, that's the thing. And this goes back to snow days. If we close, that impacts the daycares. It impacts everybody. Right. And so we've got to be able to communicate to all of those different publics what we're doing in a respectful way so that, people can make plans accordingly.
Adam?
Same thing. We're going to, our website, we've got the communication, the direct communication with parents where we can send messages out via phone, text. Like Brian said, we're going to put it out on our social media pages. And again, just because someone else posts it does not mean that it's correct. So, and again, the old-fashioned phone call, hey, I heard this, is this correct? And then we can get them the correct information.
Great. I want to thank you all for your time this afternoon. You've given us almost an hour of great information and great conversation. I want to pray for y'all before we go and pray for your staffs. It's an important year. What our schools do any year is important. It's significant what you offer to the community. And so I want to pray for you and for all the I don't knows that are ahead for y'all. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the day. We thank you for these two men who are leading our school districts. We pray for them, for wisdom, for guidance. God, if you can't give them the right answers, at least give them the right questions to pursue in the days and weeks ahead. God, we pray for our teachers who are on the front line of really teaching and leading and shaping our children. We thank you for all of their hard work. God, be with them. I know many of them are worried and fearful about what this year would look like. Give them your peace and your grace. God, we pray for our students as they enter into a very different school year. God, allow them just the peace and the flexibility to enjoy what comes this year. And God, we pray for parents. So many of us aren't sure what to expect this year. We know it's going to be different, but we're not sure what that looks like. So God, give us the courage that we need to encourage our kids, to encourage our teachers, and to encourage our school boards and administrators. So lead us into this time by your Spirit. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. I want to thank you for your time. You've watched this afternoon wherever you are. The thing that we'd encourage you to do, share this information with somebody. If you want to share it on your Facebook or Twitter feed, let others have an opportunity to hear what you've gotten to hear and experience what you've gotten to experience this afternoon. Thank you for your time.